I am Jonathan Humphreys. Welcome to the HoCoSo Conversation. It's an absolute pleasure to have Mr. Alphy Johnson back for part 3 of this series, which is Leadership Through Crisis. He is from his own company, which he set up, International Hospitality Advisor. This is the third part. In the first part, we covered the US. That was San Francisco earthquakes and the LA riots. Then part 2, we moved to Asia, where we looked at his experience in the Indonesian financial crisis. And now part 3, which is the most shocking and scary of his experiences, is in Saudi Arabia and the Al-Qaeda attack at the compound that he was staying in and his time with Rosewood. He has been described as the humble innkeeper. He is a great example of leadership. He combines calmness, focus, and action, and a level-headedness and just wonderful down-to-earthness that I hope you will appreciate when you listen to these podcasts. And once again, it's an absolute pleasure having him on board, and I hope you enjoy listening to this session from HoCoSo Connect, The Conversation. Mr. Alphy Johnson. Okay, so it's an absolute pleasure to have back Alphy Johnson, who has coined himself the humble innkeeper, and given the lively stories and history and crises that Alphy has been through, it's a real opportunity to share those insights with our audience.
Great, thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Alphy. And especially during this current time where people are looking to examples of how to lead through a crisis. And so for those of you that have not had chance to listen to the previous podcast, this is the final part. We're having covered the US and Asia. We're now embarking into the Middle East, which is the grand finale and actually the most tense of all of the situations that you have been in. And we're going to get into some specifics about the actual detail. Obviously, we need to give our audience some context for this. When the event happened, it was the year 2003. You moved to Riyadh in 2001, just before 9/11. You know, 9/11, obviously a well-documented event, depending on which generation you're in. You either were very aware of it, it happened during your time, or I'm sure you're aware of it from your history books if you're under a certain age. Similar to today in some respects, that it created a new world order and a new world structure. 9/11 was one of the major terrorist attacks that occurred around the world, and probably the landmark terrorist attack that changed the way that everyone globally viewed terrorism. Terrorism became a word that everybody became familiar with. There were many terrorist attacks as a consequence of that event around the world. There was also the consequences of 9/11 by then US presence in Iraq and Afghanistan. In the tourism industry, obviously, tourism was impacted in various countries. There were security measures taken across the world. And having traveled to that region after 9/11 and to anywhere, Turkey, all of these different places, the stringent measures that were taken by the hospitality sector in terms of security, bomb disposal units, armed security, depending on where you had to be, right, was obviously immense. And obviously it's heightened standards by pretty much all of the major hotel organizations around the world, especially in key capitals where they saw particular risk to their properties, which could have become and did become targets during the years. That's the kind of context to Alphy's situation in Saudi Arabia. But Alphy, why don't you just set the scene? You arrived just before 9/11 in Saudi Arabia. So tell us about the opportunity that you were embarking on in Saudi Arabia. And you were obviously moving there from Asia with your family at that time.
Certainly. Thank you, Jonathan. Actually, we were moving from Dallas. I'd been in the corporate office as VP of rooms, and my ambition was never to be in a corporate position more than 2 years because I felt that was the lifetime of what a corporate position should be. After that, if you're doing your job properly, you should no longer be needed. The opportunity came up to be a regional vice president for Rosewood in Saudi Arabia, in the Middle East. And family and I, we arrived there late August 2001. Let me just set the scale of the project there. It was the Al Faiz Hotel, which was a Rosewood hotel. There was also the Al Qasama Hotel, which is a smaller, older, highly successful hotel, which is adjacent to it, all within the same 2 blocks. There's also 17 restaurants, 3 apartment buildings, a residential long-stay building, and the largest ballroom in the Middle East at the time. It's large enough, column-free, to house a Boeing B-52 bomber, just to give you an idea of the scale.
It's 4,400 square meters for those that are kind of looking for some dimensions there.
And on top of this, which is kind of a curved roof, which is pretty much at street level for the hotel, was Riyadh's largest piece of green lawn, which took, believe me, a tremendous amount of work to keep green.
Especially in those temperatures.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was a pretty tough job.
That was just to give you an idea of the location. Also there we had 900 staff, and in Saudi Arabia at the time, only men were allowed to work, and we had very few Saudi employees. Despite our recruiting efforts, we were unable to attract any Saudis who wanted to work in the hospitality business. I think we had a total of 3 of our 900 were Saudi citizens. So again, that was the picture. The Alphy was in the process of finishing its opening. So there was still a lot of work going on. So it was a very new hotel, as opposed to the Al-Qasama Hotel, which is 25 years old at the time. So here we arrived, a family of 4, my wife and 2 kids. And the kids were 5 and 6. We enrolled them in the British school there, and we decided to stay in a compound. And the compound, we purposely didn't want an all-American, all-European compound. We wanted more of a mixed compound. So there were people from Middle East, people from Europe, people from the US. So it was a very nice mix of people there. And it felt very, very safe there. Because again, walled compound, a security gate at the entrance, and a great staff there. So we felt very, very comfortable there. So we were just we just moved in when 9/11 hit. And of course, that was a huge shock in the US, but also, of course, in the Middle East. In fact, I think globally. And our corporate office was a bit concerned about our well-being. I said, well, I just got here, so let me see what's happening. And found that the Saudis were very apologetic. They couldn't understand. They went out of their way to say that does not represent what Saudis thought about the US or Westerners as it was. So after 9/11, we, from the US, came to a screeching halt. But fortunately, we'd already kind of put in place a plan that we were going to attract more local business for the Al-Fayzliya than international business. And this turned out to be a very good strategy for us, because the outside business from overseas just dried up.
So when you say local business, I mean, for those of you who don't know, obviously the Saudi domestic market is pretty strong, but you're talking about the wider Gulf region as well.
Correct. By local, we included the GCC, or the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is most of the countries in that immediate region. And it's also, quite frankly, those were the folks who could afford to stay at a Rosewood Hotel. And They were good customers of ours in New York, in London, at Lanesborough, and throughout. So again, we were a known entity in that marketplace.
Just as a side note, I mean, I guess also for today, it's, interesting, obviously, with what's going on and the travel restrictions that are in place, country by country basis, the opportunity to kind of also focus on domestic markets or local markets is key for the hotel business, for the short term anyway. So similar situation.
And really, I mean, my focus on marketing is usually to market to the local community, especially since I've worked for some big brands, but most of them have been independent, smaller hotels. And it's local community that really feeds your business. Because even if it's somebody coming from the outside, they're coming in to see somebody in that city.
Yes.
And particularly at the luxury level, it tends to be fairly senior, and they're going to discuss, where should I stay when I'm there? Yeah. And if you recommend your hotel, terrific. Then you tend to be less dependent that international risk that's evident and can happen, especially in this changing world. So kids were fine in the British school. They just come from a French school, so they learned to speak English. Everybody was very happy. Then we heard rumors that the U.S. was going to attack Iraq again because of the alleged weapons of mass destruction. I kind of dismissed this, saying, why would we be crazy to do that? Unfortunately, I was very wrong. And sure enough, they went in.
For the audience, this was the second Gulf War.
Yes, the one with the weapons of mass destruction, where we actually invaded Iraq. The other ones, I think we stopped short of going into the country.
For the audience as well, obviously, that was a contentious invasion because the weapons by the various organizations that went in, UN, etc., they weren't found in the end. So it was essentially a challenge to the region as well, right? The backdrop to this is it created a lot of tension in the region. And that's why it's quite important as context to what you actually then went through.
Exactly. And the other issue was that the attack was very successful, but there's no plan for, okay, we're here. What do we do now?
So it created a lot of instability.
So as is my practice, usually when I go into a place, I like to get to know the influencers and the community, and became very good friends with the U.S. ambassador. We had lots in common. We both just come from Dallas. He arrived in Riyadh 2 weeks after 9/11. So I was there for 2 weeks before, and we had an introduction by a mutual friend in Dallas. So he reached out to me very early on and said, "Well, you're a long timer here. You've been here for 4 weeks." "Yeah, I just got here. Tell me what's going on." We were very good friends and attended quite frequently. And it's always good to have that kind of connection as well. So he started 4 weeks after I started, and he left 4 weeks after I started because he resigned because he didn't feel comfortable with the government's viewpoint at that time.
Okay. But then he became an author, right? And he wrote Desert Diplomat, and which was based on his experience. And he mentions you in the book, right? So
yes, yeah. And there's even a picture of me in the book too. So.
Okay.
In fact, I kidded with him. I said, "Okay, you've done Desert Diplomat. I'm going to do Dessert Diplomat." Yeah.
Touché.
I haven't done it yet, but we'll see what happens. And thanks to his influence, I was introduced to a lot of the other countries' ambassadors. And it's good to be in with the diplomatic corps because, again, they have access to certain beverages that other people don't in the kingdom, since those are sovereign territory where the embassies are. So whatever you do there is depending on the local laws of that country. So there's some very nice wines and beers and spirits in those locations. I was also invited to join the board of the American Business Group of Riyadh, and this consisted of presidents of all the major oil companies and defense industry companies in the kingdom. And there are many, as you can imagine. And here was I, just a little humble innkeeper, just sitting amongst these titans of industry. But I was very popular because they wanted me to be on the board so that I could host all the events and lunches and meetings.
Yeah.
And also, quite frankly, it was great for business.
I was going to say it's also soft marketing, isn't it? Right? Because they're going to bring their marketing back after their business back afterwards as a consequence of experiencing.
Well, it wasn't that soft marketing. I still marketed them pretty hard. And also, once the U.S. went into Iraq the second time, then there was a lot of emphasis on security. And here they're telling me, okay, it's kind of one-upmanship as to how many bodyguards you have. So they say, I have 24-hour bodyguards, and I have this kind of armored car that I drive around in. So I say, again, I have no bodyguards, and my car is just a standard old Lexus. So
give a sense of the distance to the Iraqi border, because obviously one of the things that you thought might be of risk was a rocket attack from Iraq, because that had already happened previously, right? So obviously the distance of those rockets was pretty achievable. What kind of distance are we talking about there?
Quite honestly, I have no idea. I'd say about 200, 300 miles.
Right, so it's still a fair distance.
Yes, we were within Scud missile range. In fact, the location of our housing complex, the Al Hamra compound, was the site where one of the rockets hit during Gulf War I, and it leveled the area. So they said, let's build a housing compound there. Well, when the tensions ratcheted up a bit, we decided that Iraqis might have the coordinates for this place.
Sure. Okay.
So we trained our kids for kind of emergencies and family. We call it our tornado drill because we lived in Dallas before. And in Dallas, you have lots of tornadoes, and you want to make sure that you have a safe place in the house, usually the bathroom, where you can congregate or go to.
We'll talk about this a bit later. It will come up in the story about how you actually dealt with your children in this particular situation. And, I think what's fascinating here is that you basically taught them about, if there's a drill, it's a tornado, you have to kind of do what you did when there was a tornado coming. And there's a great movie, I don't know if you've seen it, called Life is Beautiful. It's an Italian movie, and it's about a father who takes his son into a concentration camp, and in order to protect him from the horrors of what's going on, he makes it out to be a game that his son has to play hide and seek and keep away from the occupiers. I think it's also interesting during this particular time when there's lots of people at home, there's lots of people under stress of various situations. There's also people that have lost people to what's going on, and trying to protect the children's innocence in a certain way, especially below a certain age, is I think quite important. Otherwise they'll be living in a climate of fear, which is obviously then has an impact on your professional ability to be able to work and perform. So I think it's interesting you did that with your children, create this scenario that they were comfortable with, even though the reality was something different.
Yeah, protecting the kids from the fear is important. You don't want to be walking around and worried that something might be going on. That's why we use that tornado analogy. And it worked. We identified a location that was very safe. It was on the upper story of our townhouse. There's concrete on 3 sides.
It's pretty safe.
We're lucky. Yes. Since there aren't any basements.
Exactly. What year are we in now? You've settled in. We're kind of moving into a couple of years after 9/11. I guess things are starting to settle down to a certain extent, but there's still a threat. There's still a concern. Well, actually, the international business, especially US businesses being close to the US embassy, you at least get some kind of, let's say, communication that just says, look, we're worried, things might be happening. You normally get some kind of warning signals, and it's the same for all the international companies out there. So I guess, were you sensing something was happening, or did you get a wind of anything, or was it the attack come by surprise?
No, fortunately, the ambassador got me involved in what was called the Overseas Advisory Council. OSAC, which is a U.S. State Department organization, and they have councils in all the major countries, and it's a network of U.S. citizens who are in leadership positions who they communicate with to pass on information, so that when there is an incident, it's kind of like a network of information that goes out. So I was involved with that, so I was getting that. Also playing tennis with the ambassador. In fact, there was a bit of foursome. It was the U.S. ambassador, the Swedish ambassador, and the Australian ambassador. So when they first asked me to join them, I said, well, this can be a bit awkward. Do I address you all as Your Excellency? And they said, no. I'm Bob, Sven, and Franz. So.
Makes things easier.
But then on an embassy compound, we used to have a beer afterwards and just chit-chatted and seeing what was going on. Again, that's where I really picked up most of the information that I got. Yeah. And also, quite frankly, from our guests. We had the BBC correspondent Frank Gardner staying with us, and his cameraman. And he was attacked, and sadly his cameraman was killed. So we knew something was going on. And it was during one of these, we just finished tennis. My wife, Barbara, her dad was going to have heart surgery. So she said, should I go or should I stay? And I said, well, you need to go for your dad and let me find out what is going on. Okay. So I asked them and they said, well, the Saudis just caught a cell.
Terrorist cell, right?
Terrorist, right. So we think we're okay. So Barbara went off to Chicago. Her dad's surgery went well. And then she was about to head back. And that's when the attack happened. But again, the important thing was that we knew something was going on. And we didn't know exactly because, I said, well, what do you know? He said, we don't know what, we don't know when, we don't know where it's going to occur. There will be an attack. And I said, well, how do you know this? He said, well, through chatter over the telephone and internet.
There were small-scale attacks that were happening at that particular time. There were shootings at traffic lights and things like this. There was a lot of tension, right? And it just needed some coordinated effort, and something bigger was going to happen.
In my American business group, they suggested that I take security precautions. So I said, what exactly do you mean? One of them said, let me have my security guy talk to you. So I did that, and he suggested changing cars every couple of days, not going the same route between home and work, and just varying the schedule. Being in the hotel business, your schedule is varied anyway. And also, I had a driver, but I did not use a driver because I would have no compunction about plowing through a roadblock, whereas a driver would be very hesitant to do anything that would damage the car.
So interesting. You've got foreboding. What's happening with your team at the hotel at the time? Is this something that you were privy to yourself and your staff weren't aware, or was this common knowledge that people were sensing something wasn't quite right? How did you communicate this with your team and your staff? Because obviously you want to make sure that somehow they are mentally prepared, same as the situation with your children. You don't want them to be fearful that they panic, right? So how do you manage that when you're in charge of a hotel like this with hundreds of staff?
Basically, I want to be as transparent as possible. Whatever was published information, I shared with them. Okay. A lot of published information was for U.S. citizens, but to me, that didn't matter what their citizenship was, they were people. So I just shared that information with them. We offered, if any family or staff felt nervous or didn't feel safe, I said, don't worry about it. We'll get you a ticket home, and then that's fine. We'll see what else we can find for you within the Rosewood family. And only one person took me up on it. After 3 weeks, he wanted to come back, but I think his wife said no. So.
Okay. The observation here is that you gave transparent communication. It's very clear. You also gave people opt-out, right? So they're really there then on their own voluntary basis in terms of personal tension, especially if there are maybe discussions within the family unit or whatever about what's right, what they should be doing, you gave them that opportunity. So essentially now you've got staff that are supportive on site, they're there for their job, looking after the guests, etc.
I also had the same person who gave me advice on security come and address the executive team.
Okay, so they were hearing it on a professional basis as well.
And I was the only one who was living off-site because we provided very nice housing for the rest of the staff.
Okay, so just to be clear, so the compound where you were living was separate from the hotel.
Yes.
What was the distance between the compound and the hotel?
It took about 20 minutes driving on the highway.
Right.
So,
okay, I mean, just for clarification, it was the compound that was attacked.
It was one of 3 compounds that was attacked that night.
3 compounds. Yeah. Okay.
And there's supposed to be a 4th one, but that's the terrorist cell that they disrupted and found.
All right. So we'll get into that in terms of, exactly how that happened. But also there was this sense that things were getting worrying because of, you said, to do with the mosques as well. What was going on there with the mosques? Because obviously you've got the call to prayer. So I've heard it in many parts of the world and, it's very regular. But how could you tell that something wasn't quite right?
Well, usually the Friday call to prayer was done by the imam himself. Other times there's often a recording, but on Fridays it was an imam who did that. And there was a mosque which was fairly radical, not far from our compound. And, I don't understand Arabic, but I can still sense the tone. And instead of being a very nice melodic call to prayer, this is very strident. And when the imam is saying Ameriki and Israeli in the same sentence, that's not good.
Yeah.
And I could hear that the imam was also getting very emotional and wound up. So that to me was kind of a warning. And also the owners of the Al-Faisal Foundation, they also introduced me to some Islamic scholars just so that at least I'd have a connection with the Islamic world. So and that was very helpful. And I mean, it didn't insulate me from what was going on or from the attack, but it never hurt to have that. And also we supported a lot of their charities by providing food, especially during Ramadan for the iftars after the breaking of the fast. So they appreciated that and they realized that we weren't the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been a constant theme throughout the various conversations we've had when you were in LA with regards to the riots and you were helping out there in Indonesia. And also now is this sense of community, how important you learned Indonesian in Indonesia just to, as you said, it was a more simple language than Arabic, but it was really so that you could kind of start to appreciate what was going on. And here you tried to get him at least a cultural learning as well so that you could really appreciate the nuances or challenges. And I think that it sounds like you kind of breaking down the barriers of them and us.
Exactly. And also we wanted to hire more Saudis in the hotel. So every Thursday afternoon, which is equivalent to Saturday afternoon, the Western world, I had an open office. Any Saudi who wanted to come in and have a chat about the hotel business was very welcome. And I had maybe 5 to 10 Saudis every week in the office. And these are very interesting conversations.
Yeah, it's kind of two-way. They're getting educated and somehow you're getting educated as well.
Exactly.
I mean, the fortunate thing is you had a good relationship locally. But I guess there was also what was happening in the background is that you had, at the time, the US Secretary of State was Colin Powell. He was going to be staying, right, at your hotel.
Correct.
So obviously news must have got out about that, I would assume, or not. Was that a confidential trip?
The visit had been made public, but where he was staying was not.
Okay, so they just knew he was coming, but they didn't know where he was staying. Okay.
And typically somebody of that rank would be staying at a royal guest house.
Okay.
But he didn't want to do that. Colin Powell didn't want to do that. He wanted to stay where other people stay. So, I mean, our hotel was completely locked down for security purposes. Yeah, in fact, I was supposed to go to a dinner the night before he arrived. But since my wife Barb, she was in Chicago, and I'd been hearing all these warnings, so I said, nah, I'm not going to that dinner of other GMs. Also a good source of information. So I'm going home. And it was going to be an early morning anyway.
Basically, you were trying to get away from it and go home.
Yes.
So just for context, there were 4 compounds in Riyadh. There were 4 different terrorist cells, right? All part of the same organization, but 4 cells.
Right.
And one of those cells had been disbanded through counterintelligence measures.
Right.
But it still left 3 cells. You obviously didn't know this at the time, but there were 3 cells.
We thought there was just one.
Yeah. So there were 3 cells, and these attacks, in hindsight, when you realized afterwards what happened, these 3 attacks happened at the same time.
Simultaneously.
There were 3 attacks at the same time across the city, 3 separate compounds, but yours was the least secure of the 3. Why was that?
It was a civilian compound.
It was civilian. Okay, yeah. So soft target versus a hard target.
Exactly. Yeah, the other ones were essentially military contractors. And because the ambassador knew something was going on, because he was having dinner at one of our restaurants, which is 27 floors above ground, he saw the explosions, these 3 explosions, all going off almost simultaneously.
Yeah, it's pretty scary stuff. And the irony is you had gone home to kind of get away from things, thinking that something might be happening, or you're just concerned generally, and you think, I'm going to be safe for going home to the compound.
Because I had the 2 kids there.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to be with the kids.
Okay.
So that's the reason I went home.
Okay, so if anything happened, you wanted to make sure you were on the compound.
Exactly. Okay. Not that we're expecting anything to happen, but again, just with all the warnings and my wife Barb not being there, I decided
absolutely
better to be there.
So what happened? Could you kind of set the scene for us? Where were you? What did you hear? What did you see? I mean, what time was it when all this started?
It was about 11:30. I just seen the closing bell on Wall Street, and I was just going around turning lights off when I heard the machine gun fire.
Just before this, so you had a sense something was going to happen? I mean, was it you were on full alert? What was your expectation that something was going to happen at this stage? Because you probably had lots of warnings and drills and things like this where nothing happened, right? So,
yes, yeah. And since they caught that 1 cell and the threat level was down, then we thought it was all taken care of. But I wanted to be at home with the kids.
Okay.
The Jim of the Holiday Inn, who's Jordanian, went to the dinner. His family lived on the same compound. They left their 8-year-old daughter alone or with a nanny. And the explosion happened. She walked out. There were gunmen there, and they shot at her. Fortunately, they hit her hand, but still. And she went up to them and spoke in Arabic and said, Uncle, somebody's broken all my windows. The guy just turns around and starts shooting at her.
I mean, it's shocking. So you were, luckily at the right place at the right time for your kids, right?
Yes, yeah.
As a side note, do they still remember this or?
Oh, yes. Yeah. It comes out in little dribs and drabs. Actually, our daughter was fine. She was a bit younger. She was a year and a half younger than our son. But our son, once he found out, he was a bit, traumatized by it.
So take us back to the night. So it's 11:30 at night. You've just turned all the lights off.
Yeah. I hear this rattle of machine gun fire and an explosion. And a lot of people thought it was fireworks. But in Saudi Arabia, you don't have too many fireworks. But when I heard that, basically I went around and turned all the lights off because the 2 townhouses next to us were both vacant. So I figured I'm going to make us look as vacant as possible.
Fair enough. And so what did you then do? I mean, your children were asleep at this time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Woke them up, said tornado.
Okay.
And so we all dashed into our safe room. I mean, it was just a closet, but it was concrete on 3 sides. And we sat down maybe 3 seconds and suddenly, huge flash. An explosion. I mean, we were literally lifted a few inches off the floor and dumped back down again just from the force of the explosion.
Incredible.
So 400 pounds of RDX explosives. So.
Oh, really? And how far was that from the house, that explosion, do you think?
It was arranged in kind of a star shape where you had the central community areas and swimming pools and all that. And then you had spokes radiating from those. And there was 1 row between the explosion and us. Okay. And that row took the brunt of the explosion.
So what was it that caused the explosion? What was it, a truck or?
Yes. Basically, it was a little convoy it was a Pizza Hut delivery truck. And because the guards were used to that coming in and out all the time. So it was kind of a delivery van for pizzas. And it was packed with 400 pounds of RDX and golf balls.
And golf balls, huh? Yeah. So they use that for shrapnel. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And there was a pool close by, and there was an air crew from private jets sitting by the pool having dinner, and they heard this car screeching around the corner and figured that wasn't good. So most of the crew jumped in the pool. The captain, being a captain, decided, I'm going to stay here. Well, there's a glass in front of them, and the blast happened on the other side of the glass. The glass decapitated him.
Wow, that is shocking. It's really shocking.
Yeah.
So it was a devastating attack, huh? 54 fatalities in that one attack on that compound. That's incredible. Yeah, obviously it wasn't just the explosion, right? So you were inside, the explosion happened, you were in the safe room. Obviously you didn't know the impact to your house at that particular point in time. You just assumed there was something happening.
Yeah.
A lot of noise. But then obviously it's the aftermath of that in terms of then they come into the compound themselves, right?
Well, There was a convoy, I think, of 4 or 5 cars, the Pizza Hut truck, and then 4 or 5 cars behind it filled with gunmen. And basically at each little street in the star arrangement, they dropped off 2 gunmen to shoot people who came out to see what was happening.
Okay, it's pretty shocking. So they had what, 8 to 10 gunmen or something like that.
Yeah.
And did they come into the house or not? Did they?
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay, but you didn't hear anything. Like you didn't
No,
hear people coming into the
but
house.
I mean, we heard them shooting right outside where our front door was, because I mean, we had no windows and no doors. There's nothing to stop somebody from coming in.
No, of course not. So what happened then? You were in the shelter, tornado room.
Right.
This goes on for quite a while, right? When did you know that it was safe to come out, or what happened next?
Basically, the phone rang, and I wanted to stop the phone from ringing. So
of course, right.
I crawled across my stomach to answer. It was next to my bed. And it was Bob, the ambassador, saying, Alfie, are you okay? So I said, yes, we're fine. The kids are fine. And he knew that Barb had gone to Chicago. He said, give me your phone number and we'll call her to let her know that you're fine.
Is that because the news was going to get out pretty fast about this?
Yes.
Okay. Because you obviously had press staying at the hotel I guess it would have leaked pretty quickly.
It would have, but again, nobody showed up for hours, including the police. And the police station was a quarter mile away.
Interesting. All right, so people stayed way clear, right?
Yeah, and they were warning people not to go in because there were bad people inside.
Incredible. So what happened next? There must have been a point where you feel like you were comfortable coming out of the actual shelter. How long were you in there for?
I'd say we were in there probably for about half an hour, 15 minutes of which we heard gunfire. In the last 15 minutes, we didn't hear any gunfire because, I mean, they were firing pretty wildly. In fact, when the ambassador called, there was still gunfire going on because he said, what's going on? I said, well, the attack is still going on. He said, okay, hang tight. Help is on the way.
Okay. What were you feeling at this particular point in time? Can you remember?
My one focus was to take care of the kids and keep them safe.
Okay.
Then the owner's rep called me, Saudi gentleman named Mossad, and he said, I heard what's going on. Can I come and get you? Mm-hmm. So I said, yes, please. And he said, okay, pack your bags. And when I'm getting close, I have no idea how long it's going to take me to get there. We'll get in your car and follow me. So I said, okay. I'm going to ask some other people to join us if you don't mind. He said, no problem. So we basically put the kids in front of the VCR, and I forget which movie they were watching. But, I kind of just went around our little cul-de-sac to see how everybody else was doing and what they knew or didn't know, and just chatted with them and saw what happened. And then fairly soon, I had a call from the owner's rep, and the police had basically stopped him from going. There's a roadblock. Nobody could get into our compound.
I see. Okay.
So he had to drive across the desert to get to us. So then we basically had a little convoy. One of our good friends, a Lebanese family, he thought it was fireworks, so he went outside his balcony to see what was going on. And he was there when the explosion went off. He was cut on the forehead by a piece of glass.
How many people were living on the compound?
I think there were about 400 families.
So it's a huge compound, though.
Yes.
400 families. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. 400 villas then, potentially, or houses. So like a small town, really.
Exactly. And there's one small apartment building, which is where the faculty of the British school was. And the British school was located on the compound. Okay. So the kids just walked to school.
Essentially, it's got one security all the way around, which one entrance normally, right? Or maybe 2 entrances.
2 entrances, yeah.
At this stage, I guess you didn't know necessarily the state, the consequences of what happened on the compound, or it was more just ad hoc at this stage?
Not yet. We just knew what happened in our immediate surroundings. And when we left, I had the kids in the back, and we had these kind of sunshades that we put up. And so I had them put the sunshades up because it was not a nice scene outside.
When you were driving?
Yes, when we were driving out of the compound.
Okay.
And our daughter said, Daddy, why is that man lying naked in the middle of the road?
Yeah, questions you don't really want to have to be answering at that.
Must have been really tired.
Yeah. So you're trying to protect your family first and foremost, trying to get out safe. Where were you going to head to?
To the hotel.
Okay.
And so we headed to the hotel. Again, we had this convoy. It ended up being about 20 cars, and we had to drive across the desert because all the roads were blocked.
So you didn't get much sleep that night?
Absolutely none. Fortunately, this Lebanese family, they had 2 kids of our kids' age. So they said, we'll take care of your kids. We'll do a sleepover at our place. And I got them a nice suite, and I went to the hotel and basically took actions to make sure that the hotel was protected because we never knew. We didn't know if we were going to be the next target.
So then you got to the hotel. As you said, you didn't know what was going to happen next. So you know that your family's safe there with you, but then your secondary focus is now the hotel and make sure that the hotel is secure. So what did you do next? What time is it now? About 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning?
Something like that. Yeah, about 2 o'clock probably. Or actually, probably a bit later. Yeah. Well, I learned from my LA days during the riots, lock the entrances. So I put cars across, all the entrances. We had underground garage. Basically, we put our biggest car there because that's the last thing you want to do is have truck bongo in an underground garage underneath your hotel.
Yeah.
And our hotel was fairly quickly secured. I'd say it was already under high alert because Colin Powell was going to come and stay with us.
Okay, right.
So we already had some soldiers there. But then by the time I got there, they already had armored cars patrolling around the place. And I suggested that they park themselves at the entrances and exits so that nobody could get in either one.
So how many staff did you have on site at that time at 3 in the morning to help out doing all of this? Or was everybody there?
Well, everybody's there because everybody lives on
the compound of the hotel. So you woke everybody up. It's like, get your asses out of bed. Right?
Well, I didn't have to wake them up. They were already aware of what was going on. We had pretty much a full hotel, and because we had a lot of the U.S. State Department security staying there because the secretary was going to be staying with us. So, and again, they were in touch with the embassy. I met with them once I got there and asked them what was going on because they had more information than I did. Yeah, they're the ones who told me that there were 2 other compounds that were also hit.
So now you're at early hours of the morning. You're trying to secure the hotel. So what were you doing in terms of communication? How were you communicating? How were you feeling at this particular point in time? Were you running on adrenaline or?
Actually on adrenaline. I tried calling, of course, my wife, but all the foreign exchanges, all telephones were blocked off, including cell phones. Everything was just shut down.
Yeah.
I was able to get a email message to Rosewood in Dallas because email was still working because we had a private satellite dish. So which didn't go through the government. And so I was able to give them basically a brief rundown, basically saying, everybody's fine, hotel's fine, they didn't hit the hotel.
Good. Okay. So you managed to get that message out.
Exactly. And the owner's rep picked us up, so he knew exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
And the hotel basically filled up with what they call the refugees from our compounds. And we had an apartment building that was empty. It was residences, and it had just been completed. We just furnished it. And so we leased that out too.
I mean, obviously, there's huge demand at that particular point. I mean, it's a real crisis. People are literally, they don't want to stay on that compound, and they're probably flooding into all the hotels. You've basically got to look after them as well. How do you do this? This is a delicate balance. You obviously want to make money, but at the same time, you're looking after their livelihood. So how does that work in a situation like this? Because it's a very fine, delicate balance here. I mean, we've seen it with the current crisis where the hotels have been offering places of accommodation for nurses and doctors, etc. You can't obviously charge them. It's just about trying to cover the costs in those situations to do that. How did you handle that? Did you just say, look, it's fine, just come in, we'll sort it out later?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's an emergency, right?
Yeah. And also, I was very confident that we would be able to collect because, again, but the first time to take care of the guests and their immediate needs. Some needed medical attention. I mean, nothing serious, but so we brought in a doctor in his kit.
So it's basically just get everybody accommodated and we'll sort it all out in the next few days.
Exactly.
I mean, plenty of time afterwards.
I knew the companies that they worked for. These were companies who could afford to.
Yeah, they're going to look after them, right?
Exactly. Okay. And most of the companies were already clients of the hotel.
Yeah. How did you look after your guests and staff during this? So I presume you didn't get much sleep that night.
I got no sleep that night.
Not surprised. You have to keep communicating. You have to look after them. You got probably food, drink that needs to be. So all operations was still kind of running through the night, I presume.
Exactly.
How did you make sure your staff were feeling okay during this time?
Well, I spent a lot of time with the staff and just chatting with them, going to the back of the house. And I mean, it was very moving because they were so concerned for me and the family.
That's really nice.
That was nice. And so then morning came and a lot of what I call the alphabet people, CNN, ABC, CBC, all started showing up and they all wanted to interview me because I'd been there. Thank you, but no thank you. I don't want my face all over the screens. Also, I'd been informed that Secretary Powell was not coming to the hotel, but he was still coming to Saudi Arabia. And your ambassador called me and said, would you like to show him around your compound? So I said, well, thank you very much, but I'll give it a miss because if you don't mind, there's going to be lots of media there. And I did not want my face all over the TV screens. So I was still living there. So I didn't want to become a known target.
To be fair, you had your children at the hotel, you had your staff, you had your guests, you had a huge responsibility to make sure that was still going to be working and everyone was going to be looked after. There must have been a focus there as well.
I chatted with the media. I recognized a lot of their faces, but I said, this is purely for background. No source. This is just background information.
Yeah.
And they gave me more information than I was giving them. So.
Okay. When did you know that was an all clear? Like next day, obviously the hotel, it looks like a compound. It looks like an army compound. I guess there's barbed wire, there's police, there's everything. So when did you get the all clear from this, that everything was okay? I presume that did they capture the cells or not? Did they disappear?
They disappeared and didn't catch them until about a year later. So
that's incredible.
We never received the all clear.
Okay.
So it went to the top level and said, don't think that this is over. So be careful. And slowly communications opened up. I was able to speak with Barb finally. And she said, I want to come. I said, well, there aren't any flights. Let me check. One of our neighbors was a good friend of ours. He was GM of Lufthansa, and they had frequent daily flights coming in, but they were having no flights coming in at that point. But they were running evacuation flights for German citizens. So I said, any chance that we can get Barb into Saudi Arabia? So, okay, have her fly to Frankfurt. I'll make the arrangements. And so she flew to Frankfurt. She went to Lufthansa desk. She said, I'm supposed to be flying to Riyadh. And I said, no. Nobody is flying to Riyadh at the moment. She said, please humor me. Just check your computer. Put my name in and see what happens. Did so. Yes, you're flying to Riyadh in 2 hours.
The only passenger, probably.
Yeah. Well, there was some medical teams on there as well. But again, she said that was the longest flight she's ever had because she's just so worried. It was great to have her there, because that way it could kind of delegate the kids back to her. But also my email was just going crazy with everybody emailing me from the US and other places, seeing if I was okay. And so I had a call from National Public Radio in the US. I lived in Chicago. You're familiar with the National Public Radio. Yeah. All Things Considered is their news program. And they asked if I'd like to do a radio interview. So I said, this way I can get word out. I'm fine. And my face doesn't get flashed on the TV. So I said, sure, I'd be happy to do it. So I did the radio interview. I think you've heard it.
I have. Just for the context, this was literally the next day or within 48 hours. It was the next day. So it's still within 24 hours of, I mean, what's remarkable about that interview is just the way that you still hadn't had any sleep.
And no sleep.
And the interviewer, she said, you're remarkably calm and collected considering what you've just been through. I can't remember your response exactly to her, but it was quite remarkable.
I don't remember that.
To be fair, I think through all these stories, there is this sense of calm and collectedness that you tend to have, even in these extreme situations. Where do you draw that from? I mean, is there something where you're able to get yourself into that state? Do you have a technique for doing it?
I just go into automatic and I just do what needs to get done. And I don't think too much about it. I just get it done, be visible, communicate with people, be upfront with them, tell them what's going on, and make sure everybody's okay.
It's interesting because obviously people react under stress and pressure in very different ways. You have people that become very flappable, chaotic. They become visibly stressed. They lose it with people. Then you have the other type that go very quiet. They disappear, don't know what to do. But, I think what's impressive is that you have this approach that somehow you've developed through your life, which has allowed you to be in these situations, but at the same time, almost take control of the situation to a certain extent. Obviously, all of these situations that we've covered, these stories, whether it's the LA riots, San Francisco earthquakes, the Al-Qaeda, they're all massively outside of your control. But somehow you've gained a sense of control. I find that quite fascinating. It seems like through the communication and through your approach, you've been able to instill a sense of control in your direct environment. And that seems to be really important. At least that's my takeaway interpretation from the conversation.
Well, my wife, she describes it as I get in the zone and I'm just totally focused on what needs to get done. And I don't get distracted very easily from the mission, which is take care of the family, take care of the guests, staff. So,
I went through a phase, and actually it was just after I had our first child, Ben, and, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of pressure on career. I was doing an exec MBA at the time. We just had our first child. I was struggling with prioritizing. Really, it was a big challenge. So I created this mental pyramid, and I said to myself, look, I have to create this prioritization for myself. Otherwise, I'm always in conflict. And things changed on that pyramid maybe after a month or 2 months, but it really helped me. But just based on what you've said, it sounds like you almost have a mental pyramid of, okay, well, my family's first, then the staff and then the guests. Right. Do you have a mental pyramid of priorities that maybe help? Or how does it work?
It's not really, because they all need attention.
Sure.
Yeah. So you can't just do one at a time. So you have to really juggle them as best you can. I also used the world clock because I knew that Dallas was going to be asleep. So I knew I wasn't going to hear from them.
Yeah. So there's no point in worrying.
Yeah, exactly. In that email, I said, can you please send me a satellite phone? Because again, the phone systems were all down. And by some miracle, a satellite phone appeared on my desk within 48 hours.
That's amazing.
So when I called them on it, I said, how did you do this? How did you get a phone from Dallas to Riyadh in these circumstances? The airspace is closed. And their response was, don't ask. So I said, okay, I won't ask.
It's a very nice gift, and probably, I'm sure, one of the gifts that you most appreciated at that time.
Oh, absolutely. Because again, you have no support there. I was there to support everybody else, but who's going to support me?
Exactly.
The family was very helpful, and Barb was great. But again, there was a lot of weight on the shoulder.
So a question, it sounds like you did get some kind of logistics technical support from head office. So where did you go for support during that time and afterwards, in terms of either mental support or just knowing somebody's got your back? Could you go somewhere? Did you know you had any air cover somewhere?
The owners were terrific. They basically said, tell me what you need.
Okay.
And whatever it was, we got it.
Yeah.
So, we had all these military around there, but they were just standing there. I said, what are they doing?
Yeah.
They said, well, they're for presence. I said, yeah, if somebody's going to attack us, it's going to be with a bomb. Can we get some bomb detection equipment?
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, you got it. And we had it. And also we had to install license plate recognition software, which is fairly new in those days, 2003.
It's only really the military probably had that, right?
Exactly. And also I said, if you hear anything, let me know, because we're assuming something else is going to happen. Yeah. And it did, but that's a different story.
Okay. Maybe not maybe.
No, unfortunately, I can't.
Okay.
Publish that.
All right. Okay. Maybe for a book one time, if you're allowed to, if you get the all clear.
The Desert Diplomat.
Exactly. Once the 30 years have passed or whatever it is.
But also the next day I went back to the compound, because when we packed in a hurry, you forget things, especially for the kids. Yeah. I was not used to packing for the kids. So I went back to the compound and looked during daylight to see what kind of devastation there was. And it was horrendous. This Pizza Hut truck had made a hole 2 to 3 meters deep.
That's incredible.
That was the force of the explosion. And the one thing that really stood out was that all the palm trees were bare. All the fronds was being blown off. So
from the blast, yeah. It's incredible.
And I was there, I'd say it was probably about 14, 15 hours after I'd left, and FBI investigators were already there.
That's interesting. So they're pretty fast in.
Yeah. So after a week or two, I had a chat with the investigators. How did they get there that fast? They said, they were in the region.
Yeah. So that's a story we probably won't get to know about. But obviously, this topic is really about leadership and management through crisis. I think that we covered most of the overall experience. Some of the aspects to this, I'm trying to bring together some of the constant themes that I'm hearing from our various discussions. As much as I would like to say that leaders are not born, they're made, because otherwise it doesn't give people any chance at all, right? If leaders are born. But I feel like somehow there is an aspect to your personality which makes for a great leader, which is this ability to cope with these very high pressure situations and very calmly and collectively be on board with everybody around you, communicate clearly in a very stressful situation. At the same time, the constant other aspect is you always spent time to build up relationships in the quiet times. I don't think in any of these situations, you weren't building them up for a crisis.
No.
You were building them up because that's who you are. It seems like you just enjoy building up these relationships and creating the sense of community around you and trying to move away from this us and them situation where basically there's a more egalitarian approach to relationships that are much more on an equal footing and a more human footing. And that has, just by your nature and who you are, has put you in very good stead for when there is a crisis. You've had these great relationships in place. And it's not through any, I would say, orchestration. It's just because you enjoy doing that. It's part of what you do. And having this cultural assimilation that was at your speech when you gave it to the Hilton University in Houston, that you were telling the students about one of the most important aspects is to try and assimilate yourself into the culture. It's really about trying to just break down the barriers between people. I just get this sense that these themes, these common aspects have helped you through this crisis. And therefore, I'm going back to the point about great leaders. They are made, but they're made through characteristics that are built up over time. And you built these characteristics up, and it was obviously part of your upbringing. I'm sure your parents did a wonderful job with you, and you've had great friends and family and But, part of it's reflection as well, to reflect on the experiences you've had and put them into context to be able to then adapt to a new situation.
Absolutely. And in preparation for this, I kind of went back through all these situations and said, okay, now what really worked that I can share that with others? One is preparation. Be prepared for the unknown. Something's going to happen. You don't know what, you don't know when, you don't know where, but just be mentally ready for it.
It's incredible that during this time, I think it's what we have not been doing in our current system. It's been moving so fast, so fast. There were very few people that were preparing for the worst in any shape or form in this current crisis. And it kind of prepare for the worst and hope for the best, right? Which I think you've said a few times in the discussions. And it just hasn't been the case. And I think now maybe there will be a shift mentally of people, individuals in leadership positions saying, okay, I am going to scenario plan what the worst, because I'm going to go there just so that I can mentally go there. Then I'm prepared. Because if you've just gone there mentally, that's already the starting point. You don't have to dwell on it. You don't have to focus on it, but just mentally go there. And then maybe that mental bit is, I'll probably be okay. I could probably get through it, right? But then if you don't do that and you have the shock of the unknown, it's much worse. Your brain can't react and adjust that fast to the given situation.
Exactly. And I think that there's been an absence of leadership, quite frankly, in the current situation. And it's everybody's looking out for themselves or for their own country or their own city or whatever, whereas looking at things as a whole. And I mean, that's a shame. I think that we could have lessened the impact as far as it was going to happen. But I think we could have listened if we'd looked at the global good rather than just our own good and preparing for it. We were woefully unprepared. The preparations have been cut for our country and the Center for Disease Control. They cut the budget and then they're surprised that something was missed.
Yeah, it's partly that, isn't it? Partly financing. And I understand prioritization and financing. You've got to make decisions. And I also feel we have a culture of ignoring or not allowing that dialogue to take place. We've kind of instilled a culture that it has to be positive all the time. You have to talk positive. You can't say anything negative, right? For fear of potential retribution. But it's actually not about being negative. It's about having a realistic, constructive dialogue of a tail event that may not happen. But have we thought about it? Even that dialogue hasn't happened because it's like, well, you're being too negative. We can't focus on that. Times are too good. What are you talking about? Right. So either times were different back then, or you were able to do this in a way that didn't frighten people. And you were very constructive in the way that you approached these possibilities, probabilities. I mean, obviously, some of them were higher probabilities than others, but maybe that is part of it. It's the way you approached it, the way you communicated it to allow people to kind of get comfortable with the situation or for yourself.
Well, I think also you're understanding that the person doesn't have an agenda besides taking care of what's happening and taking care of them.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And that is your agenda, right? Just to take care of people. So there's that one. I think that's key. I think that's mental preparation as well as organizational preparation.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. The other thing was, putting family first. That's key. Then also, again, keeping a positive, calm presence and demonstrating empathy. I think that's absolutely essential. Thinking ahead, again, that's part of preparation, but again, thinking ahead, not just, well, this is what I think is going to happen, but all the different iterations of what could happen and what might happen. There's danger in that you're looking at all these different things, bad things that could happen, but you basically prepare for likely eventualities.
Yeah, sure. What I like about this aspect as well is you can also say, well, where are my strengths within these possibilities? But also highlighted here, where is my Achilles heel during this? Where am I most vulnerable rather than weaknesses? And either it's my organization, my company, my leadership team. You can take it on many different levels, right?
And the other thing is to know your resources, know how to get things done. And where can I get security? Where can I get the metal detectors you have to put through on all the doors? Where can I get face masks? These are all things.
This comes back to that network, right? Having built that network over time. Now, obviously, some situations, if you don't know the answer, if you've built that network, somebody might be able to help you, right?
Exactly.
And they may know. So it may be a second or third iteration of your network, but it'll happen. Like the satellite phone arriving, basically because somebody knew somebody who knew somebody that got you that phone.
But the other thing is to ask for help, because number one, it'll get people involved and they feel that they're contributing it, but don't expect any.
Okay, that's interesting. Right.
I mean, especially for the first 72 hours, typically it takes a while for help to get mobilized and to get there. That was particularly true in San Francisco earthquake, where all the resources are so stretched. All the police, fire, ambulance are so stretched. Don't expect any help from them.
And how do you ask for help without seeming vulnerable? So when you're asking for help, are you asking normally for very specific things? Have you already thought exactly what you need?
Yes,
that's the
very,
solution
very
to the problem. And then you say, okay, can you help me please get this?
Yes.
I need this to help do my job.
And usually people offer to help in
Yes.
these situations. That's where you have your list ready. Thank you for
Okay.
asking. This is what I need. Boom, 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 boom.
Okay. So it's about just being very thoughtful about how you approach that.
Yeah, exactly.
Offer for help and do take people up on it, right? But be
Yes.
super specific.
Absolutely. And again, communication to all concerned. So that's up, down, across, down, roundabouts, whatever. And you have to make sure that you're telling the same story to everybody. So the best way to do that is by being truthful.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this has been a constant theme as well, is that where information is allowed to be published, as in it's publicly available or it can be shared, you've made a situation where you've literally communicated that information to everybody. Just, it seems like it makes your life a lot easier.
Oh, it does. You don't have to
Right.
know who you told what.
Plus, everybody is equally informed.
Exactly. And this is the information age. So people figure it out pretty quickly if you're not telling them the truth.
Yeah, but I liked the idea. I think also the takeaway for this one is also using media and forms of media cleverly. I like the idea that you had all this overload of communication from all the emails from the US and you used NPR to try and get your message across, say, look, everything's fine. We're okay.
And it worked.
Yeah, it's perfect.
And the other thing to do is to stay well informed, know what's going on around you, and constantly have your ear to the ground, because that's absolutely critical in any situation, even in day-to-day.
And what I liked about that is the way that you stayed informed in a lot of the situations was not necessarily through press or media, but it was through your contacts, the conversations that you were having. And that helped, because the thing is with media, especially in a crisis, they're late to the game. They're only reporting what's happened. They're not reporting what's happening the second it's happening or before it's happening. So having your contacts in all the various stories that we've talked about, you've been able to get a sense of what's going on that's more immediate that you can then act on. So I think that's very helpful.
Exactly. And also be ready for the second wave, because invariably something's going to happen, whether it's an aftershock for an earthquake, which can be worse than the original, or the riots, which were going to happen. And also, the second wave doesn't necessarily look like the first wave. So in Jakarta, after the riots, you had the economic downturn, or vice versa.
Yeah, and I guess in Riyadh, the second wave was this new heightened security level that you then had to live with for who knows how long, which became a new normal. I presume that was the second.
No, there was another one.
There was another one for another story.
Yeah, I was going to wait for the book.
One day. Okay.
After a few years.
So this is interesting because we're so focused on getting through this current crisis. The second wave on this one, there's two question marks. We have economic question mark, economic impact, jobs, all of the impact around that. But then there could even be a third wave, which is socioeconomic, societal impact.
Exactly.
It's very risky to just stay focused on what is currently going on. And when you get through it, say, okay, well, fine.
And that's very dangerous. So you really have to be looking for that second wave. And also prepare for the recovery. And that, again, helps people heal and focus on something that's positive.
Yeah.
So how do we recover from this as quickly as possible? Because, again, people's livelihoods are relying on it, and see how you can help. Early on, when I think about 6 weeks ago, we were chatting, and I said, well, perhaps some hotels should look to be quarantine locations or help out the hospitals. And that's happening.
Yeah. I think part of the recovery, part of the healing is the community aspect. And I like that in all the situations you've been in. That has been a constant theme as well. And if the community starts to heal, everybody starts to heal. And you can kind of look at community in different circles, right? But I've always get a sense that you're looking to try and bridge out and try and heal that community in whatever way you can, as that role that you have at that particular point in time. And I think it's very powerful.
That, and the other thing is to share your experiences, because if anybody learns anything from these discussions, great. Yeah. You don't have to suffer through these as I did to learn from them.
Exactly. That's the challenge, is that sometimes we're learning for the first time. That's the wonderful thing about doing these podcasts with you and these discussions, having these discussions with you, Alfie, is that for me, it's an opportunity to appreciate from your experience, not through leadership theory and textbooks, but from your personal experience about how you really navigated and led through these crises. That's what I hope the listeners will also gain as part of these 2 podcasts that we've now put together on this topic, that they take away some very practical elements and aspects of the reality of leading through a crisis. Because I think that is really where, if people can learn from what you've done and be prepared mentally, a lot of it's mental preparation and psychologically and emotionally, right? All of those. And you've talked a lot about empathy. You've talked a lot about community. You've talked a lot about networking. You've talked a lot about friendships. There's a constant theme coming through that I think you've built a lot of friendships around the world, and especially in different places you've gone to. And I would like to just say thank you for being a friend, Alfie, during this crisis. And thank you for sharing all of your insights and your experiences with us, so that we can all benefit going forward through this crisis. And I'm sure there'll be another one. But as a consequence of your efforts, we're better prepared for the future.
And the great thing is that all this preparation, it doesn't go to waste, because you can use it during the course of your business day or your home day. Because again, this is an effort that does not go to waste. Building relationships is never a bad thing.
Absolutely. I mean, all of these things you can apply in your personal life as well. Right?
Exactly.
So it's a holistic approach to leadership. And in the house, maybe it's more of it's not a leadership, it's a partnership. Also helpful. So we can apply it to that as well. Is that what you're saying? Very good. I think it's a very positive note to end on. And I think overall, what I liked about all of our conversations, you have a very positive tone, even though some of these have been pretty horrendous and challenging situations that you've been through. And I'm just thankful that you made it through it with your family and with your health as well. So I just wanted to say a big thank you, Alfie.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.